Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Back in the proper setup for today. Ahead of the French Grand Prix, Red Bull's Christian Horner believes that Mercedes may well challenge for the victory next weekend, but also Mercedes are potentially being helped during the summer break by the third power unit they will be introducing in the latter half of this season. They believe it's got a significant upgrade over the previous versions that may well put their power back on par with where Ferrari and Red Bull seem to be in terms of straight line performance right now. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate. This is actually rather interesting, the championship leads after round 11 compared to previous seasons. I'm sure that many will be looking back at 2012 here and kind of shedding a tear for Fernando Alonso and Ferrari that season. Yeah, 38 points behind. It is a pretty significant deficit to what we've seen been overturned in the past, but it's not out of the realms of possibility. Of course, reliability will play a very crucial factor. Speaking of Ferrari, of course, Haas Ferrari, there has been questions as to whether Haas have the decision on who they keep as their driver, because when earlier this season Mick Schumacher wasn't looking particularly good, there were rumours that they wanted to get rid of him, but Ferrari effectively were going to force them to keep the Schumacher name in the team anyway. Of course, as it's turned out, he's looked rather good the last few races and picked up a couple of points. But Günther Steiner actually did say from the Haas side that one shouldn't conclude that Ferrari is telling us what we have to do. We have a say in their driver pairing, but more than likely, at least as it presently stands, they'll probably remain the same for next season. Speaking of that, actually, there was an interesting few words here from George Russell talking about the time he spent with Williams. There's a podcast that came out a few days ago. A few quotes from this one, right? I think people are looking at this quote in particular and saying, wow, George Russell, so disrespectful to Williams as a team. And I'm not really sure that was his intention here. Of course, it's going to come across when he says that in hindsight, 3 years driving on my own at the back was too long. Unfortunately, Claire Williams did quite a good job in contract negotiations, so there was no way out, right? So he's kind of regretting in a way, I'm staying so long at Williams, wanting to leave earlier. Not like there was many other opportunities out there, to be honest. Of course, the Mercedes seat eventually did come along for him when Bottas goes away and they bring Russell into the team. He did actually mention, though, that it actually might have worked out quite well for him that he didn't join the team, because he was thinking, what if he joins at Mercedes in 2020 or something and had to deal with the W11 with Lewis Hamilton, right, that effectively Mercedes had designed in Lewis's favour for the last several years. And he was thinking, well, actually, that could have been a pretty demoralising first season had he have faced Lewis Hamilton, effectively, his baby car that season. Of course, as the season turned out, the race or the season was rather shorter than might have been expected. But I think Russell's actually quite happy he joined the team now, despite saying that maybe he should have left Williams a little bit earlier. But of course, he's still got plenty more years left in his career, and I think a lot of people feel like if Russell has the car in the next 5-10 years, he definitely has the talent to become a world champion. Let's talk about potential FIA changes for next season then, right? So we know that this new technical directive on the porpoising, but also importantly, the kind of flooring, right, the flexi floors will come in from Spa, the Belgian Grand Prix, right after the summer break. But the FIA are also planning to introduce further regulations for next season. So there's a few specific ones here that they've mentioned so far. Whether the teams don't like this or will clamp down on this or whatever, because the FIA and the teams right now don't exactly have the best of relationships, it must be said. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of teams over these last few races have seemingly dialed out a lot of the porpoising. Yes, if we went back to Azerbaijan, if we went back to Baku, it might well return at least the bouncing in the cars. So, maybe there should be something done about that to some degree. But still, a lot of the teams, since they realised that porpoising was going to be effectively reduced in the technical directive coming in just a few weeks' time, this is just for next season, then they were going to need to try and dial it out anyway, as seemingly most of them have done. But interestingly enough, apparently these are the intended rule changes for next year. 25mm raising of the floor edges, raising of underfloor diffuser throat, introduction of more stringent lateral fall deflection test, and introduction of a more accurate sensor to help quantify aerodynamic oscillations. Rather interesting stuff. This one was particularly, it caused a lot of interest really, because some people were wondering, who does this actually hurt more, right? Does it hurt Mercedes? Does it hurt Red Bull and Ferrari that have got things currently under control? Because Mercedes do seem to like to run their floors very close to the ground, so if they're to raise the kind of edges of those up, does that hurt them? I'm sure the teams are considering what this potentially means for next year and what the regulations might well look like and the performance of the cars next season. But of course, so far this season, it's been the Red Bull Ferrari show. Every single race that we've had so far has been on pole position, has been a Red Bull or Ferrari, and in terms of race victor, it's been a Red Bull or a Ferrari. But Mercedes believe they're about 2 or 3 tenths behind the pace in terms of pure performance right now. And of course, they're going to look to try and break a record like this. The last time that the Mercedes power did not finish in the top 2 for the first 11 races was back in 1995. So they're certainly going to want to break that one, because they've been on the podium a fair few times, but they've only placed 3rd so far this season, no better than that. But a major advantage they might have as the second half of the season comes into effect is the 3rd power unit, which is going to come in for Mercedes at some point or another. The rumour has it that this will give them a rather significant boost in terms of their power. It was a bit of a surprise, admittedly, at the start of of this season that the Mercedes engine didn't seem to be quite as strong. There were even concerns from the likes of McLaren, like why is our car so slow? Previous years, the Mercedes engine's been faster than most other ones, and now the Ferrari engine does seem to be the strongest. The rumours we had probably a month or so ago at this point was that the Ferrari is kind of like 5 horsepower maybe ahead of the Red Bull, and then the Red Bull is maybe another 5 horsepower ahead of the Mercedes, and then the Mercedes and the kind of Renault engine of Alpine are maybe on slightly similar terms, right? So the Mercedes, one of the weaker engines this season, I think there's no denying that. Some people were wondering, is it to do with this new kind of like, well, percentage of biofuel that's coming in? The Ferrari seems to have dealt with that rather well in terms of the pure power their engine could put out, but it's of course not as reliable as the Mercedes one is. So questions up in there though, because of course when Hamilton was struggling to overtake Kevin Magnussen and also Mick Schumacher on that kind of straight in Austria, right, you'd have imagined that last year's Mercedes engine might have had enough to get past him there, regardless of the fact that, of course, look, he had a Ferrari powered engine, Hamilton had a Mercedes power last year. That probably ends a very different way than it did right here. So there's certainly some concerns. You can talk about rear wings and stuff, but it does seem like the engine is not quite as powerful. And yes, part of that was to do with the fact that generally in the higher altitudes, the Mercedes power unit has always relatively struggled compared to some of the other engines. And supposedly they were kind of concerned about the risk of breakage due to the increased thinning of the air. Therefore, they kind of, well, had a conservative choice on engine power. So, yeah, definitely some concerns here that from Toto Wolff especially, they didn't really have the speed on the straight to do much. Eventually, they get third, fourth regardless. But, they were thinking, okay, maybe our engine isn't quite as strong here and in previous races as well as it needs to be if they want to compete. So, for the third power unit coming through, PU Phase 3 is expected after the summer break, which should also include the introduction of the new hybrid parts, helping maybe with the ERS deployment and the battery part of the engine, and thus bring performance even closer to the more powerfully performing PU for Honda and above all Ferrari, with finally using the 2022 unit at full power. So this is a bit of a question mark really, because Ferrari earlier this year, we heard actually, I'm pretty sure it was after the Australian Grand Prix, that they said that their engine had another 5, 10, 20 horsepower to be unlocked. And the rumour really has it that Ferrari has been cranking their engine to the maximum to try and catch Red Bull, which of course is maybe causing some of the blow-ups that we are currently seeing. But if Mercedes can maintain their incredible reliability and introduce this new hybrid part and maybe tweak a few things to make that third engine even stronger than previous ones, we saw it last season, right, when Hamilton had a new engine in the back of his car for, maybe it was Turkey, or certainly obviously we saw it in Brazil in full force and was able to make absolute waves, right? So we might see when the third power unit, the new power unit comes in for Mercedes, that might level the playing field in terms of the raw engine performance, which might actually give Mercedes an advantage at that point in terms of who the fastest car is on the track over the course of a weekend, right? And there's few reasons such like this really. The Christian Horner does seem concerned about the performance of the Mercedes at the French Grand Prix. There was some talk from Mattia Binotto and Ferrari, of course, they're currently trailing in both Constructors' Championships. The Mercedes being back could be good for them, because imagine this weekend, like if let's say Hamilton and Russell had the second fastest car on the grid, let's say it's super tight between Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull at the top, 6 cars fighting for victories. All of a sudden, instead of Verstappen getting P2 with the fastest lap, just behind Charles Leclerc, only losing about 5 points on the weekends, given his sprint race performance, if all of a sudden you've got a Mercedes in between the Ferrari and the Red Bull, then that creates it blows the championship wide open, because there's way more points that can be lost by a driver over the course of a weekend if they don't have the greatest performance or their car has some damage or whatever the case might be. And Christian Horner actually goes on to say there's been no sign, I think, of any porpoising at all. So that was, of course, the fundamental issue for Mercedes earlier on this season. That does now seem to have been dialed out, at least at most tracks. And of course, Horner goes on to say they do seem to be bringing themselves back into the game, expecting Mercedes to be a contender. I think they'll be a contender for the victory. They'll just consistently keep scoring points. Not sure how far off they are right now in terms of constructors and drivers. It's a fair bit, but not actually that far behind Ferrari if Ferrari would have further reliability issues and Mercedes do not. But for the fans, it would be great to have 6 cars competing for victories, of course. And going on as Horner says, we'll expect them to be quick in Paul Ricard. They've shown flashes of being there or thereabouts. The last 2 races have been relatively decent for them. There's been no sign of any porpoising, so they could well be back in the game. So yeah, he does definitely believe Mercedes might well compete for something this weekend. And then with that third power unit coming in potentially after the summer break for maybe like a couple of races after Belgium or whatever exactly they want to do, that could be a further turning point in Mercedes season. A couple of interesting bits of statistical analysis here to finish up the video. I thought this is kind of incredible. Most podiums in the hybrid era since, I guess, 2014. I think there's been probably just shy of 200 races or so, probably like 190 or something in this era. Hamilton is, on the podium, 132 of them. Max Verstappen, 68, actually second place now, which is kind of incredible. Bottas, Sebastian Vettel, Nico Rosberg didn't really compete for that long during this period, but still picked up 46, and Perez and Charles Leclerc tied on 18 each during this period as well, notably Daniel Ricciardo, Kimi Raikkonen, all the big names that you might well expected here. But also, speaking of Kimi Raikkonen, he currently leads the most Grand Prix ever started in Formula 1 history at 353. Alonso recently overtook, I believe it was Michael Schumacher, for the longest ever Formula 1 career. And he is soon also about to overtake Kimi Raikkonen for the most ever Grand Prix starts. At the end of this season, Fernando Alonso will, more than likely, if things go as we expect them to, overtake Kimi for the most ever Grand Prix. Rubens Barrichello, Jenson Button, Michael Schumacher. Hamilton is actually about to break 300 as well, which is kind of incredible. Vettel not far behind, Massat, Patrese, and Jarno Trulli as well, closing out the top 10 here. But kind of incredible that if Vettel does race every race of the season, he will also finish on 300. Could he retire on a nice round 300 Grand Prix start and win the final one? That's maybe ambitious. We'll see how things go. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.